San Francisco, California. A neighborhood home being renovated in 2016. Beneath the old Victorian floorboards, workers unearthed a sealed iron hatch, rusted shut, bolted into the foundation. What lay beneath hadn't seen daylight in nearly 150 years. Inside the hidden chamber, they discovered a small casket, glass-lined, child-sized, perfectly preserved. Through the cloudy pane, the form of a little girl was visible, pale hands folded over her chest, curled brown hair still clinging to her scalp. Dressed in a white lace gown, her face seemingly untouched by time, the workers froze. This wasn't a skeleton, this was something else. But as forensic experts later examined the body, something deeply unsettling emerged. Her skin showed signs of age. Wrinkles had formed around the eyes. The lips had shriveled. Even more disturbing, her teeth had shifted, as if new ones had grown post-mortem, and the once blue irises had turned a dark, unnatural shade of grey. A child buried in 1869, who had somehow aged after death. No one could explain it. The case was never formally released to the public, but it's real. It was documented, and to this day no one knows why she changed. In the year 1869, San Francisco was a city teetering between eras. The gold rush had passed, leaving behind a strange blend of European immigrants, railroad wealth, and epidemics that came in waves like the fog rolling over Nob Hill. Disease took children swiftly back then, often in the span of days, and grief was a language every household spoke. In one modest home near what is now the Richmond district, a German immigrant family named von Leer settled into their quiet routines. The father, Friedrich von Leer, was a glassworker by trade, his wife Anna, a deeply religious woman who clung to a mix of Catholicism and old country folk beliefs. They had two daughters, but it was the youngest, Edith, just 3 years old, who drew everyone's affection. Bright-eyed, soft-voiced, and always clinging to her mother's skirts, Edith was the kind of child who seemed too delicate for the world even before her illness came. It began with a fever. A small cough, then a rash which the old women in the neighborhood whispered might be scarlet fever. The doctor arrived by carriage but left quietly before sundown. Within 48 hours, Edith was gone. But what happened next was anything but ordinary. Anna von Leer refused a public burial. Instead, she insisted on a private embalming using a preservation fluid not common in that part of the country. Her husband, using his skills in glasscraft, constructed a custom casket with a clear viewing pane. The body was carefully dressed in Edith's christening gown, surrounded by white rose petals, and lowered into a subterranean tomb built beneath the home, a sealed chamber, lined with stone and iron, meant to protect her from both time and rot. The neighbors thought it strange, but said nothing. Grief took many shapes. But what no one knew was that Anna returned to that hatch night after night. It was said she would whisper lullabies into the floorboards, recite prayers not found in any church, and burn strange herbs brought over from the old world. To her, Edith was not gone, only sleeping. In the years that followed, the family moved east, and the house changed hands multiple times. Over time, the location of the burial was forgotten, the records lost, and the story of little Edith faded into the dust of history until the floor opened again. But even before that accidental discovery in 2016, strange details had already surrounded the von Leer home. A set of old letters, passed down through descendants of the original neighbors, mentioned a curious sound heard from beneath the floor late at night. One letter, dated 1872, described a soft thumping, like the fist of a child, against a wooden lid, always after midnight, always followed by silence. Another described Anna's descent into seclusion. Mrs. von Leer no longer speaks to the living. She has chosen to dwell with her dead. Some believed she'd lost her mind. Others weren't so sure. What was certain? A child had died. A casket had been sealed. And a mother had gone to unthinkable lengths to keep her daughter untouched by time. But the body they found was not the same child who had been laid to rest. Her skin had changed, her eyes had changed, even her teeth had changed. And the more investigators looked, the more impossible the truth became. The rediscovery of Edith's resting place came not from historians or archaeologists, but from contractors. In May of 2016, a crew tasked with foundation work on a Victorian home in San Francisco's Richmond district struck something solid beneath the floor. What they first assumed was an old storage vault quickly revealed itself to be a sealed chamber, hidden under generations of wood and plaster. When the hatch was pried open, a rush of stagnant air poured out. Inside the stone chamber, resting on a narrow platform, was a small coffin made of metal and glass. It was no ordinary casket. Its design was intricate, its seal impeccable. Despite the century and a half that had passed, the glass remained intact, allowing the workers to peer into the past. Through the translucent lid, they saw her, a little girl dressed in white lace, her hair still curled neatly around her face. She looked as though she had been laid to rest only days before. The shock left the men speechless. They had expected bones or dust. Instead, they found a child who seemed untouched by decay. Word spread quickly. Local authorities were contacted, and soon the San Francisco Medical Examiner's Office arrived at the scene. The discovery posed a unique problem. How does one handle a child's body, preserved for nearly 150 years, hidden beneath a modern home? The body was carefully transported to a secure facility. There, under clinical light, the first details began to unravel the illusion of peaceful preservation. At first glance, Edith's body was indeed immaculate. Her cheeks still held a faint blush. Her eyelids, though partially closed, revealed eyes that had not collapsed into empty sockets. The lace of her gown was still intact, and the rose petals placed beside her remained faintly visible. But the longer the examiners studied her, the more disturbing the findings became. There were lines at the corners of her eyes, not the smooth skin of a 3-year-old, but faint wrinkles, as if decades of time had crept across her face. Her lips had tightened and thinned. More unsettling still was her mouth. When examined under magnification, it became clear that teeth had shifted forward. Small incisors, which should have remained hidden in death, had erupted past the gum line. The phenomenon confounded the medical team. Teeth do not grow after death. Wrinkles do not form. Yet here was a body that suggested otherwise. Dr. Michael Thaler, a forensic pathologist brought in to observe, later recalled, quote, "It was as though the body had not simply been preserved, but had continued along some distorted biological timeline." End quote. The medical community debated possibilities. Some argued the embalming fluid used, perhaps an early arsenic-based preservative, had interacted with the tissues in unexpected ways. Others suggested the airtight chamber had created a unique microenvironment that mimicked the effects of slow, distorted aging. Yet, none of these theories explained the eyes. Originally described in burial records as pale blue, the irises now appeared dark grey, almost black. This could not be attributed to chemical staining alone. Under the sterile glow of the lab, the girl's gaze seemed to follow those who approached. The anomaly was not only biological but psychological. Investigators who worked with the body began to report unease. One technician swore he heard faint tapping on the examination table, as if tiny fingers had brushed against the metal. Another refused to enter the chamber alone, insisting that the child's expression had changed subtly between visits, a tightening of the brow, a deepening of the lines at her mouth. Beyond the laboratory, word of the discovery reached the public. Local news outlets briefly covered the find, but details were scarce. Officials avoided the more disturbing aspects, speaking only of an unusually well-preserved burial. Privately, however, the staff struggled with what they had witnessed. Into this silence stepped folklore. San Francisco's older immigrant families whispered of angel children, infants and toddlers believed to linger between life and death. In some traditions, parents who feared the loss of a child would attempt to bind their spirit through ritual, preserving the body to prevent the soul's departure. Though condemned by the church, such practices persisted in private, blending old-world superstition with new-world desperation. Letters from neighbours hinted that Anna von Leer may have dabbled in such customs. Several noted strange herbs she burned, chants in German dialects that no priest recognized, and her nightly vigils above the hatch where her daughter lay. If true, Edith's preservation was not merely a feat of chemistry, it was a ritual act of a grieving mother unwilling to let go. And yet, science could not look away. The strange aging effects defied classification. Photographs taken during examination circulated quietly among pathologists. In one, Edith's face appeared smooth and doll-like. In another, taken weeks later, deeper creases were visible at her temples. Whether this was an artifact of lighting or something more was left to speculation. One forensic report, heavily redacted before release, included a chilling line. Quote, "The subject's tissues display signs of chronological progression inconsistent with known post-mortem processes." End quote. Chronological progression, as if the body itself had continued to age. What made the discovery more haunting was its secrecy. Authorities chose not to publicize the anomaly, fearing public hysteria. Officially, the case was classified as a rare but natural instance of mummification. Unofficially, those who saw her spoke of something far stranger. The community of Richmond, upon learning of the hidden grave, held vigils. Some left flowers near the property, others prayed. For many, Edith was no longer simply a child who had died. She was a reminder that the line between life and death was thinner than anyone cared to admit. As weeks turned into months, whispers grew. Workers who had first discovered the casket refused to return to the site. Residents nearby reported strange noises at night, tapping, faint cries, the smell of burning roses carried on the fog. Science sought answers. Faith offered warnings. But neither could fully explain the child who aged in death. And soon, the line between investigation and folklore would blur into something even more disturbing. The moment of truth came not in the laboratory, but in the quiet decision of what to do with Edith's body. By late summer of 2016, pressure was mounting. The neighborhood wanted answers. Historians wanted records, the church wanted the child laid to rest, and the city officials wanted the case closed. The San Francisco Medical Examiner's Office scheduled one final, thorough review before Edith would be reburied in a public cemetery. Forensic specialists, clergy members, and even a folklorist were present. They gathered in a sterile chamber, the coffin placed beneath bright surgical lights, cameras trained on every angle. The glass was carefully removed. For the first time in nearly 150 years, Edith's body was exposed to open air. A hush fell over the room. Her face, though still that of a child, bore unmistakable marks of time. Wrinkles traced across her brow. Her hands, once soft and rounded, had grown sinewy, the skin taut over bone. The tiny pearls of baby teeth were no longer uniform. Instead, new adult teeth jutted awkwardly from her gums, as if growth had continued long after death. Dr. Thaler whispered, barely audible, quote, "She looks older. This is not the same child we first saw." End quote. Every eye turned to him, but no one disagreed. The team began documenting every detail. Skin samples were taken, hair was measured, photographs clicked in rapid succession. Yet, as the process unfolded, something unsettling occurred. A technician dropped his scalpel. He insisted that the child's lips had twitched ever so slightly, as if about to form a word. Another claimed her eyelids shifted, revealing a flash of the grey, clouded irises beneath. The room grew tense. Rational minds dismissed it as the trick of light and nerves, but unease spread like a shadow. The folklorist, Dr. Helen Strauss, finally spoke. Quote, "You must understand, in some traditions, a mother could bind her child's soul to the body, believing it would protect the spirit from wandering. But if the ritual was incomplete, the body would continue changing." End quote. Her words were met with silence. Even the clergy had no rebuttal. As if to punctuate her warning, a sound echoed in the chamber. 3 soft knocks. Everyone froze. The source was unclear. Some swore it came from beneath the examination table. Others insisted it was the coffin itself. Cameras were checked, microphones replayed. The knocks were real. Fear rippled through the group. One examiner stepped back, crossing himself. Another whispered that they should stop, that the body should be reburied immediately. Yet protocol demanded they finish. The documentation continued, though. Hands trembled and voices shook. When the final measurements were taken, the body was placed back into the glass coffin. It was then that one last discovery surfaced. Beneath Edith's gown, tucked into the folds of lace, lay a withered scrap of paper. Ink faded, but words still legible in German script. Bleib bei mir, Alte mit mir. Mutter wird dich nie verlassen. Translated, stay with me, grow old with me, mother will never leave you. The room fell silent. It was no longer theory. Anna von Leer had not simply preserved her daughter's body. She had attempted to preserve her daughter's life. Her ritual, her whispered prayers, had not been meant to freeze Edith in innocence, but to pull her through time itself, a grotesque shadow of growing old together. The realization struck each observer differently. Some recoiled in horror, others stared at the child with pity. One priest murmured a prayer under his breath, his voice shaking. And then, as if to answer the note, Edith's body shifted. Her head tilted slightly to the side, a strand of hair slid across her forehead. The change was undeniable. Cameras captured it, witnesses swore it happened. A body that should have been still for a century and a half had moved. Panic broke the room. Lights flickered overhead. The air grew heavy with the smell of wilted roses. Someone shouted to seal the coffin. Another called for immediate reburial. Amid the chaos, the coffin lid was slammed shut, bolts tightened, and the chamber evacuated. No further analysis was conducted. The city deemed the investigation complete. Within a week, Edith's coffin was quietly transported to Colma, California, the city of the dead, where San Francisco cemeteries had long been relocated. She was interred under a simple marker, her name and dates carved into stone at last. Yet those who had seen her that day carried something they could never unsee. A child's body that had grown old, a ritual that had crossed centuries, and a mother's grief that refused to let go. The official report, stripped of its more disturbing details, concluded with a single line. Quote, subject reinterred, no further study recommended. End quote. Unofficially, whispers continued. Some claimed Edith's coffin was not sealed properly during transport, and that workers heard a faint tapping inside. Others swore the scrap of paper vanished before burial, spirited away by someone who feared its power. And in the Richmond district where the house once stood, neighbors still tell stories. On certain foggy nights, they say, if you walk past the old foundation and listen closely, you can hear the sound of a child's voice, low, broken, and aged beyond its years, calling for her mother. The coffin was lowered into the soil of Colma, a town known as the City of Souls. There, among countless others exhumed from San Francisco during the city's early years, Edith von Leer was finally given a marked grave. Flowers were laid. A priest offered blessings. The story, at least on paper, was finished. But endings are rarely so simple. For the medical examiner's office, the discovery left an uncomfortable legacy. Internal memos advised staff not to discuss the case publicly. Photos were archived under restricted access. The explanation, released to the press, a remarkable case of natural preservation, was deliberately bland, meant to pacify curiosity without revealing the darker findings. Yet those who stood in the examination room could never shake what they had seen. A body altered by time, as if death itself had not been enough to halt its progress. Among forensic pathologists, debate persisted. Some clung to science, suggesting obscure chemical reactions had warped tissues in ways that mimicked aging. Others, though reluctant to admit it, confessed that no rational model explained the eruption of teeth or the shifting eyes. A handful quietly labelled the phenomenon post-mortem chronological progression, a term as clinical as it was unsettling. But science was only one side of the story. In San Francisco's German-American community, Edith's tale stirred memories of old-world traditions long suppressed. Folk healers spoke of rituals where grief-stricken mothers attempted to bind a child's soul to its body. Rare, whispered practices in which the dead were urged to grow old with the living. The note found in Edith's gown was no accident. It was a mother's final act of desperation, written in ink that somehow endured the ages. Theologians debated the implications. Was this proof of a soul tethered unnaturally to flesh, or evidence of the lengths to which love warped by grief could bend faith? Priests warned of the dangers of rituals outside the church. Pastors offered sermons on the dangers of clinging to the dead. Yet in private, many admitted they had no explanation for the body that aged beneath the earth. For the family's descendants, the revelation was bittersweet. They had grown up with fragments of rumor: a child who died young, a mother who mourned too deeply, but none had imagined the truth. Some chose silence, unwilling to carry the burden of association. Others visited Colma, placing flowers on the grave of the child they never knew. And for the people of San Francisco, the story lingered in subtler ways. Residents near the Richmond district spoke of dreams filled with the sound of lullabies. A construction worker swore he heard a child's whisper beneath the floorboards weeks after the coffin was removed. A woman walking her dog past the site claimed to feel a sudden tug on her coat, though no one was there. Whether these were the echoes of imagination or something more, no one could say. What remained was a haunting question. Can grief alter the natural order? Could a mother's refusal to let go of her child have carved a wound deep enough in time itself that her daughter's body continued to change long after burial? Science offered no definitive answer. Faith warned of dangerous love. Folklore whispered that Edith had lived a second life beneath the ground, unseen by the world above. Today, visitors to Colma sometimes pause at her grave. It is unremarkable, one stone among thousands. Yet those who know the story linger longer. They imagine the child who once lay in crystal clarity, her eyes clouded, but watching her body marked by years she never lived. A child who died at 3, a body that aged without life, and a mother's promise that death could not break. Reflection lingers like fog over San Francisco. If the boundary between life and death can bend for one, how many others lie beneath the earth, carrying secrets time has yet to reveal? If this story unsettled you, subscribe to uncover more forgotten dread tales history tried to bury.